And in this particular case, the Republicans were right.
So you think the Republicans are sort of an extreme fringe party?
No, I don't think that they're an extreme fringe party. I think that they're operating against those they believe are extreme on the left. Like, for example, when you talk about the LGBTQ community, I'm a fiscal conservative and I'm a social liberal. I'm fiscal with my dollars. I ain't apologizing for not wanting to pay high taxes to anybody. I'm not apologizing for that, right? But outside of that, I'm pretty liberal. Live and let live.
Have you ever noticed how some people refuse to accept reality even when it is right in front of them? That is exactly what has been happening in the Democratic Party for years, and it honestly took someone like Stephen A. Smith, who normally spends his time talking about sports, to step up and say what so many Americans have been thinking all along, and when he did, he went straight after the entire woke agenda a lot of people out. They're like to claim the Republican Party has turned into some kind of extreme fringe movement, and that is the mainstream story we always hear, but Stephen A. Smith was not having it. Instead, he pushed back and said, no, that is not what is really happening. What Republicans are doing is responding to the extremes on the left, the radical wing that took control of the Democratic Party. And if we are being honest, he is right, because what most Americans want is not radical or extreme, it is just common sense. Smith made it clear that he comes from a unique perspective, saying, look, I am a fiscal conservative. I do not want higher taxes. I want to keep my money, and who can argue with that? But when it comes to social issues, he is more liberal with a live and let live mindset, and that is actually where most of America is too, somewhere in the middle, not out on the edges. People simply want to work hard, raise their families, pay their bills, and be left alone. But here is the problem: the Democrats stopped paying attention to those people and instead became obsessed with wokeness, and it was not just some minor distraction. It became the core of their identity, with bathroom debates, biological men competing in women's sports, pronoun lectures in schools. And while those issues technically affect less than 1% of the population, they dominated the headlines. The Democrats decided to highlight these fringe ideas rather than focusing on what really matters to everyday families, like the economy, jobs, safety, and stability.
I'm pretty liberal. Live and let live, okay? But you had folks on the left that were introducing some things when we got in the whole transgender issue, and they were talking about bathrooms, or they were talking about males transitioning to females and competing against girls in sports and stuff like that.
These are less than 1% of the population.
I understand that.
But you know what?
But I think that's where the mistake is made.
Yeah.
You're saying it's ridiculous. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
But most of the voters out there don't think like that.
But that means they don't have the information.
Okay, but 90% of the voters don't have the information.
And that right there was their biggest mistake, because while the woke crowd was shouting about identity politics, middle America was speaking out about fairness, common sense, and reality. Mothers did not want their daughters sharing bathrooms with biological men. Parents did not want their kids competing in unfair athletic events. Families did not want lectures about gender ideology pushed into their schools. But every time those concerns were voiced, Democrats brushed them off as bigoted or intolerant, and that arrogance eventually came back to hurt them. Now here is where Stephen A. Smith really hit the point. He explained that most Americans do not have the time to sit around analyzing politics all day, and that is the truth. People are working multiple jobs, sitting in traffic, struggling to make ends meet, paying outrageous rent, and buying groceries that seem to double in price every other week. Do you think they have the luxury of digging through political reports or watching every single detail in the news? Absolutely not. And honestly, they should not have to, because when policies stop making sense, when they feel disconnected from daily life, people naturally reject them. It is survival mode.
If you're out there busting your tail to make ends meet and to pay your bills, and you're going to work every day, and you got a family to take care of, and you're in New York City, you're getting stuck 2 hours of your day, get stuck in traffic, you understand, you got a whole bunch of stuff to go through. You don't have time to know what you and I know.
Maybe you need to listen to the news when you're in traffic.
Well, again,
maybe
I agree
not
with
be
that.
uninformed.
Or listen to stuff that's going to take you away from the things that brings down your spirit. And that's unfortunately what most voters are.
If you are stuck choosing between buying food for your kids or paying for gas just to get to work, you do not want to hear endless talk about someone's pronouns. You want leadership that actually solves real problems. And we cannot ignore Kamala Harris in all of this. She was supposed to be the rising star, the heir apparent, the one who would inspire voters and carry the Democratic torch. But what happened? Nothing, and in fact worse than nothing. Because her career ended up being dismantled by her own decisions. Harris was not chosen by the people she was placed on the ticket, and Americans can sense that kind of political engineering from a mile away. She did not win primaries, she did not inspire voters, she did not earn her spot, and voters never forgot it. And then once she got into office, she doubled down on woke ideology instead of focusing on real issues.
Because you were inserted, even though you were the vice president and it was the Biden-Harris administration, you had folks who are independent. I'm not talking about those on the right. I'm not talking about those on the left, just independents. who said, wait a minute, she didn't experience a primary either. The last time we saw her in a primary was 4 years ago, and she didn't even make it to Iowa. They used that as an excuse to point to her level of inexperience. Then you got the war in Russia and Ukraine. You got the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Hamas and Hezbollah and all of that stuff. And you had Trump using codes. Look, do you want her? Where is she? Where's the interviews? Where's she showing herself? Where's the tough questions? Where's the interrogation? And he leaned on certain things.
And Stephen A. Smith highlighted something that was both obvious and devastating. Harris avoided difficult interviews, she dodged real scrutiny, and she never gave Americans the opportunity to see if she had the toughness to actually lead. And when a politician runs from hard questions, people naturally assume they cannot handle them, and that only made the doubts about her competence grow even deeper.
The problem is those on the fringes continuously push for you to get everything you want.
Yeah.
They're not about getting things done. They're about getting their way. And if they're not going to get their way, they're about complaining and griping about it, because they understand that when you are operating based off of grievance, that's usually what provokes you to get to the polls. And that is why they don't mind feeling aggrieved and displaying and disseminating that kind of message, because they know people are going to gravitate to that. And as a result, that might get them to the polls, you thinking you're going to get what you want as a result.
And if that was not already bad enough, let us look at her actual record. Remember the border crisis that was her major assignment, and it turned into a complete disaster. Illegal crossings skyrocketed, fentanyl poured into the country, and communities across America paid the price for her negligence. She failed at one of the most important responsibilities she was given, and no amount of political spin could cover it up. But here is where it gets interesting. Some people tried to blame Harris's collapse on sexism or misogyny, even suggesting that America simply is not ready for a female president.
Howard Stern says that he wasn't confident that the country was ready to elect the first female president because he knows, quote, how men talk behind closed doors about us. So we're very privileged to have a great guy here today.
Yeah.
Tell her, what do men say about us behind
Well,
closed
first of
doors?
all,
Yeah. Say it to our face.
Yeah.
Do tell.
I don't hide, so no worries there. Here's the deal. I respectfully disagree with Howard Stern, only from the standpoint that I wish he had been more specific. Why don't you say white men? Because let me tell you something about black men. We love our mamas.
I know that.
We love.
And let us be clear and cut through all the noise here. The issue has never been that America is unwilling to elect a woman. Voters did not reject Harris or Hillary Clinton because of gender. They rejected them because of incompetence and dishonesty. Harris failed at leadership, and Hillary was weighed down by scandal after scandal, from the private email server to the Clinton Foundation to the constant sense that she was hiding something. Voters did not see strength, they saw weakness. And when you are running for the highest office in the nation, weakness is a political death sentence. America absolutely will elect a female president one day, but it will not be someone who hides behind identity politics. It will be a woman who proves she is competent, trustworthy, and capable of making the tough calls. That is the standard, and it should remain the standard.
We revere black women, and when we're trifling, we know it's us. It's not them.
Right, yeah.
You understand? So when he's saying that, okay, well then let's talk about white men. We have a white power structure that still exists in this country today. I understand the white populace in this country was over 85% at one time. It's now dipped to about 57.4%.
Yep.
The white power structure is still in place. So when we talk about misogyny, when we talk about chauvinism, when we talk about women not necessarily being empowered, well, who's in a position of power to surrender some of that power? It's white men. So I think that when Howard Stern was talking, I can't speak to what white men are thinking. I can tell you this much: black men, we revere women.
Now here is where we bring everything full circle. The Democrats lost because they allowed themselves to become prisoners of their own extreme wing. They let wokeness define the party, even when it was deeply unpopular, and instead of pushing back and saying no, that does not represent us, they stayed silent, and that silence came across as approval to everyday Americans. It looked like the entire party had gone off the deep end. Meanwhile, Republicans recognized the opening and stepped in. They positioned themselves as the counterbalance, the opposition to cultural chaos, and whether people agree with them or not, that is the reason they won.
And in this particular case, the Republicans were right.
So
It
you
worked.
think the Republicans are sort of an extreme fringe party?
No,
at
I
this
don't.
point?
I don't think that they're an extreme fringe party. I think that they're operating against those they believe are extreme on the left. Like, for example, when you talk about the LGBTQ community, I'm a fiscal conservative and I'm a social liberal. I'm fiscal with my dollars. I ain't apologizing for not wanting to pay high taxes to anybody. I'm not apologizing for that, right? But outside of that, I'm pretty liberal. Live and let live.
Stephen A. Smith summed it up perfectly. Most Americans do not live on the fringes. They are not far left or far right. They are centrists who simply want practical common sense leadership. And the Democrats ruin their chances by catering to their most radical activists instead of focusing on the majority of voters.
Remember, though, that he said, does everybody remember he originally said he was just going to do it for 4
That's
years?
right.
Yeah.
That's what I brought up.
Right. And did you think that once you know who stepped in, he said, well, there's nobody, we don't have anybody?
Well, the point is that it's not about who you're going up against when you know you're not what you used to be. And see, this is where covering sports puts me at a distinct advantage. I cover people every day where it's time for you to go, but you're holding on and you don't want to leave. People who cover the world of sports are accustomed to seeing that all the time. And so now here you are, to answer your question directly, you are the left. You leaned and you were a prisoner to the extreme left in a lot of people's eyes. Well, guess what? Most of America doesn't operate on the fringes. Whether you're left or you're right, you're relatively centrist.
So here is the big takeaway: ideology does not win elections. Reality does. You can give endless lectures about inclusivity, pronouns, or progress, but at the end of the day, if families cannot afford groceries, if they do not feel safe in their neighborhoods, and if they do not trust their leaders, they're going to vote for change. And that is exactly what happened. Maybe the Democrats will finally learn something from this. Maybe they will realize that dismissing everyday concerns as bigotry does not work, that doubling down on failed leaders like Harris or Clinton is political suicide, and that wokeness, far from being progress, is a losing strategy. But based on their record, I would not hold my breath. So what do you think? Is Stephen A. Smith correct in calling out the Democrats' obsession with wokeness? Was Kamala Harris ever qualified to lead, or was she always destined to fall apart? Share your thoughts in the comments, because I want to hear from you. And if you made it this far, do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because this conversation is not going away anytime soon. At the end of the day, Stephen A. Smith did what so many politicians refuse to do. He spoke the truth. And whether people want to admit it or not, the truth is this: America is not rejecting women, it is rejecting weakness. It is not rejecting progress, it is rejecting nonsense. And until the Democrats understand that, they will continue to lose.